When Aislinn Taggart stepped off the bus at Fort Jackson, her visible limp immediately marked her as a target. Drill Sergeant Wolcott's eyes narrowed with disapproval. "The military doesn't have time for broken parts," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. Fellow recruits exchanged glances, already writing her off. Nobody offered help with her duffel bag. Nobody expected her to last the week. What they didn't know was that beneath her quiet exterior lay a strength forged in circumstances they couldn't begin to imagine. And on the day of the final assessment, every assumption they made would be shattered beyond repair. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you appreciate stories of resilience and hidden strength, consider subscribing for more moments that remind us not to judge by appearances. The bus lurched to a stop at Fort Jackson, doors hissing open to release a cloud of nervous energy as recruits filed out. Aislinn Taggart remained seated until last, mentally preparing for the moment everyone would notice. She had practiced this arrival countless times, but nothing quite prepared her for the weight of those first stairs. As she navigated the steep bus steps with her distinctive uneven gait, the already forming lines outside fell momentarily silent. Drill Sergeant Wolcott's eyes tracked her movement, his weathered face hardening at the sight of her limp. 26 years in the service had taught him to spot weakness instantly, and in his assessment, this one would not last a week. "Move with purpose, recruit," he barked as Aislinn adjusted her grip on her duffel. The bag was heavy, made more unwieldy by her compromised balance, but she would die before asking for help. The morning unfolded in a blur of shouted instructions, paperwork, and the controlled chaos of in-processing. During initial formation, Wolcott made his way down the line, a predator seeking vulnerability. "Name," he demanded, stopping before her. "Taggart, sir. Aislinn Taggart." Wolcott's eyes narrowed. "The military is a precision machine, Taggart. It does not have time for broken parts." He gestured toward her leg. "How long until you quit?" "I will not be quitting, sir," Aislinn replied, eyes fixed forward. Barracks assignment came next. Squad Leader Rhodes, a sharp-featured woman with ambition radiating from every pore, looked Aislinn up and down before tossing her a key. "Bottom bunk by the latrine," Rhodes said, not bothering to lower her voice. "So, you do not have far to go when you quit." That night, after lights out, Aislinn carefully unwrapped the compression bandage from her leg. The scars caught the faint moonlight filtering through the windows, surgical lines, and the irregular pattern of healed trauma. Her fingers traced the familiar topography as she massaged the aching muscles. From her footlocker, she removed a worn photograph, its edges soft from handling, and studied it briefly before tucking it beneath her pillow. A stifled sob from across the bay caught her attention. Private Finley, the youngest recruit, was struggling with her bunk. During inspection, her hospital corners had failed 3 times. One more failure meant night exercises for the entire bay. Silently, Aislinn rose, crossed to Finley's bunk, and methodically demonstrated the proper technique. No words exchanged, just calm, precise movements. When Drill Sergeant Merrick burst in for surprise inspection, minutes later, Finley passed for the first time. Aislinn was back in her own bunk, eyes closed, invisible once more. The first weeks established a rhythm of calculated cruelty. Each morning, Wolcott found new ways to highlight Aislinn's perceived weakness. Each evening, Rhodes ensured Aislinn understood she was the platoon's greatest liability. What no one witnessed, Aislinn rising at 0. 400 hours, 45 minutes before wake-up call, to stretch her leg through a series of exercises developed through years of rehabilitation. No one saw how she had modified her boots with custom insoles or how she had reinforced her uniform at stress points that affected her gait. During the 3rd week, the obstacle course became her public humiliation. Drill Sergeant Merrick, the only female instructor and notoriously hardest on women recruits, made Aislinn repeat the wall climb 6 times while others watched. "If you cannot pull your weight, Taggart, you endanger everyone around you," Merrick shouted as Aislinn struggled up again, arms trembling but face composed. "Is that what you want? To get real soldiers killed because of your weakness?" Aislinn never responded to the taunts, never explained, never complained. Each night, when others collapsed into exhausted sleep, she slipped out to train alone, developing alternative techniques that played to her strengths rather than highlighting her limitations. On night 23, someone was watching. Combat medic Lowry leaned against the supply shed, observing as Aislinn modified standard push-ups to redistribute weight away from her affected side. His trained eye recognized the methodology, not amateur adaptation, but professional rehabilitation technique. "Your form is good," he said, stepping from the shadows. Aislinn immediately stood at attention. "Sir, I have permission for additional PT." "At ease," Lowry replied. "I am not here to report you." He studied her stance. "Old injury or birth defect?" "Injury, sir." Lowry nodded. "Combat?" The question hung between them. Aislinn's silence was answer enough. The next morning, Aislinn found a note tucked into her boot. "Try anchoring your affected side against a fixed point during rifle stabilization. Compensates for micro tremors." It was the first of many. Anonymous advice appeared regularly. Tactical suggestions for navigating specific terrain types with her condition, nutritional recommendations to reduce inflammation, modifications for standard techniques. Each note offered an advantage without pity, respect without excessive attention. Meanwhile, platoon leader Daniels had made Aislinn his personal project. A former high school quarterback whose father and grandfather had been career military, Daniels could not stomach the idea that someone with a physical defect might wear the same uniform he aspired to honor. "You are taking a spot from someone whole," he hissed during a water break, "someone who could actually serve effectively." The platoon's 8th week brought evaluations and a meeting with commanding officers. Captain Hargrove reviewed Aislinn's file while she stood before his desk. "Taggart," he said without looking up, "your physical performance metrics are concerning. You are consistently bottom quartile in sprint tests, obstacle completion times, and combat readiness assessments." He closed the file. "Drill Sergeant Wolcott recommends a medical discharge. With an honorable discharge now, your record remains clean. You could still serve in civilian support roles." Aislinn remained perfectly still. "With respect, sir, I belong here more than most." "And why is that, Private?" "Because I have already proven I can continue under conditions others have not faced, sir." The 10th week brought a surprise night march through terrain, deliberately flooded to create challenging conditions. As recruits slipped and stumbled in the darkness, Aislinn's adapted walking style, refined through years of compensation, gave her unexpected stability on the uneven ground. When Private Finley twisted her ankle in a hidden hole, Aislinn was there instantly, showing her how to modify her weight distribution to continue without drawing attention to the injury. Medic Lowry, observing from the rear, made a decision. That evening, he accessed personnel records, pulling Aislinn's file. Most of it was standard, medical history, entry evaluations, training progress, but several sections were classified, requiring security clearance beyond his level. The redactions were unusual for a standard recruit. As training intensified toward its final phase, so did Daniel's hostility. The night before the final assessment, he cornered Aislinn during equipment preparation. "Tomorrow is Valor Ridge," he said, checking that no instructors were within earshot. 15 miles of terrain designed to break people who do not have your disadvantage. Do yourself and everyone else a favor. Report to medical with leg pain before we start. No one will think less of you. Aislinn continued meticulously preparing her pack. "Thank you for your concern." "It is not concern," Daniels snapped. "It is reality. When, not if, you collapse out there, someone will have to carry you back. That puts everyone at risk." Aislinn finally looked up, meeting his eyes directly for perhaps the first time. "No one will have to carry me, Daniels. I can promise you that." Valor Ridge loomed in pre-dawn darkness, its silhouette a jagged challenge against the graying sky. The final assessment, a 15-mile course combining steep inclines, tactical challenges, and physical obstacles, represented the culmination of everything they had endured. Success meant graduation. Failure meant recycling through training, or, for some, discharge. The platoon gathered at the starting point, breath clouding in the cold morning air. Daniels positioned himself at the front, while Aislinn took her customary place at the rear. Drill Sergeant Wolcott paced before them, voice carrying across the silent training ground. "This course breaks people, he announced. Not just physically, but mentally. You will reach points where your body says stop, and only your mind can override that command. Some of you, his gaze lingered on Aislinn, might want to consider your limitations before we begin. The first 6 miles unfolded predictably. Daniel set a punishing pace at the front, with Rhodes and the stronger recruits forming a tight pack behind him. Aislinn fell behind almost immediately, her distinctive gait marking her progress as instructors observed through binoculars from checkpoints. Taggart is already struggling, Merrick commented to Wolcott at the 3rd checkpoint. Should we have medical on standby? Wolcott frowned. Let her fail on her own terms. She has made it this far. At mile 7, the terrain changed dramatically. What had been relatively flat ground gave way to rocky, unstable slopes designed to test balance and core strength. The lead pack's pace slowed considerably as they navigated the treacherous footing, and something unexpected began to happen. Aislinn's pace did not decrease on the difficult terrain. If anything, she moved more confidently, her adapted gait providing stability where others struggled. One by one, she began overtaking exhausted recruits who had expended too much energy in the early miles. At mile 9, a helicopter appeared overhead, touching down near the course's highest checkpoint. Commander Hayes, Fort Jackson's senior training officer, stepped out, an unusual presence for a standard assessment. By mile 11, Aislinn had moved into the middle of the pack. Recruits who had never given her a second glance now watched in disbelief as she passed them, her breathing controlled, her focus absolute. She did not acknowledge them, did not gloat or even smile, just continued her steady advance. Mile 12 brought the course's most brutal challenge, a 60-degree incline covered in loose shale, requiring both strength and technique to ascend safely. At its base, Aislinn found herself directly behind Daniels, who had fallen back from the lead after pushing too hard through the rocky section. Hearing her approach, he glanced back, shock registering on his exhausted face. How the hell? On your left, Aislinn said quietly, moving to pass. Something in Daniels snapped. He shifted sideways, deliberately blocking her path on the narrow trail. Not happening, Taggart. Aislinn simply adjusted her angle and continued upward. When Daniels moved again to block her, his foot slipped on loose stone. He stumbled, nearly falling backward down the incline. Aislinn's hand shot out, stabilizing him with unexpected strength. For a moment, they stood frozen, her hand gripping his arm, preventing his fall. Then she released him and continued her ascent, leaving him staring after her. For the first time, in the clear morning light, her leg was fully visible as she climbed. The standard issue pants had ridden up slightly, revealing not just a simple limp, but evidence of extensive reconstructive surgery. A complex network of scars speaking to catastrophic injury and remarkable recovery. Aislinn crested the ridge 3 minutes ahead of the next recruit, crossing the finish line with the controlled breathing of someone who had trained for this moment for years. She stood alone, waiting as others staggered across, collapsing in exhaustion. Commander Hayes approached her directly, something unreadable in his expression. To everyone's shock, he rendered a crisp salute. "Captain Taggart," he said formally, "your father would be proud." The stunned silence was broken only by the labored breathing of exhausted recruits. Wolcott stepped forward, confusion evident. "Sir, this is Private Taggart. She is a recruit." Hayes shook his head. "This is Captain Aislinn Taggart, Special Forces qualified, temporarily demoted for this training cycle. Daughter of Commander James Taggart, recipient of the Medal of Honor." Understanding dawned on Wolcott's face. "Kandahar? The residence complex incident?" Hayes nodded. "Captain Taggart was there as a liaison officer. Took shrapnel to her femoral artery and pelvis when the IED detonated. Same explosion that killed her father after he evacuated 17 personnel. The pieces fell into place, the classified sections in her file, the professional-level rehabilitation techniques, her refusal to quit despite constant derision. After 2 years of rehabilitation, Hayes continued, Captain Taggart requested this assignment, to complete basic training alongside standard recruits, with no special treatment or acknowledgement of rank. Medic Lowry stepped forward. "Why put yourself through this?" Aislinn finally spoke, her voice steady despite the exertion of the course. Because soldiers do not all break the same way. Someone needed to prove that recovery is not just possible, it is a tactical advantage. My father taught me that adaptability under pressure is what keeps units alive. She looked directly at Daniels, then Rhodes, then Wolcott. I never wanted special treatment because of my father, or despite my leg. I just wanted the chance to earn my place. 3 weeks later, at graduation, Aislinn stood tall despite her limp as she received honors. Rhodes approached her afterward, the arrogance replaced by genuine respect. I do not know how to apologize for. You do not need to, Aislinn interrupted. You treated me exactly as I wanted to be treated, like any other soldier who needed to prove themselves. Daniels joined them, awkwardly extending his hand. That day on the ridge, you could have let me fall. That is not what teammates do, Aislinn replied simply. As the formation dispersed, Medic Lowry fell into step beside her. I knew who you were from the beginning, he admitted. Your father saved my brother in Kandahar. I wanted to see if you had his heart. He smiled. You have more. Drill Sergeant Wolcott approached last. His customary scowl softened slightly. As he pinned the insignia on her uniform, he leaned in. I said the military does not have time for broken people. Good thing you never were one. Later that evening, alone in her quarters, Aislinn removed the worn photograph from her pocket, her father with his unit, 8-year-old Aislinn standing proudly beside him. She traced his face with her finger before placing the photo in her new deployment bag. The following Monday, Captain Aislinn Taggart reported for her first official assignment, leading a specialized training unit for soldiers recovering from combat injuries. As she approached the formation, her limp was still visible, but now it commanded respect rather than doubt. It was not a symbol of weakness, but a badge of what she had overcome. Attention, called the formation leader as she approached. Aislinn took her place at the front, surveying the faces before her, men and women with visible and invisible injuries, each fighting their own battle against limitation. At ease, she said. My name is Captain Taggart, and I am here to show you that your greatest challenge can become your strongest advantage. The stillness of the training field was broken only by the distant sound of another platoon running drills. 20 pairs of eyes studied her, some skeptical, others hopeful, all searching for evidence that her words were more than motivational rhetoric. 6 months ago, I stood where you stand now, she continued. Except my instructors did not know my history. My fellow recruits saw only my limp. They called me broken. They placed bets on when I would quit. She began to walk the line, her uneven gait pronounced but purposeful. I am not here to tell you that recovery is easy, or that proving yourself will be fair. I am here because every single one of you deserves an instructor who knows exactly what you are facing. Private Calloway, a former linebacker with a prosthetic leg, shifted uncomfortably. Permission to speak freely, Captain? Granted. With respect, ma'am, how do we know you are not just another officer checking a box? Showing command you can handle the damaged goods assignment. Several recruits tensed at his boldness, but Aislinn smiled. Fair question, Calloway. She gestured toward the obstacle course visible in the distance. How about I show you instead? For the next hour, Aislinn led them through modified training exercises, demonstrating techniques that played to individual strengths while accommodating limitations. She showed Calloway how to leverage his upper body strength during wall climbs. She worked with specialist Nakamura on adjusting her balance point after traumatic brain injury. For each recruit, she had specific practical adaptations that came not from a manual, but from lived experience. By the end of that first session, the skepticism had largely evaporated. As they gathered for final instructions, Aislinn noticed a young woman at the back, Private Winter, who had remained silent throughout, her injury less visible than others. Training continues at 0600 tomorrow, Aislinn announced. Dismissed. As the formation broke, she approached Winter, who stiffened slightly. Walk with me, Private. They moved toward the administrative building in silence before Aislinn spoke. Combat stress injury is not less real because it cannot be seen. Winter's head snapped up. I never said You did not have to. I recognize the hypervigilance, the positioning against walls, the scanning of exit points. Kandahar left me with more than just a damaged leg. Winter swallowed hard. How do you make it stop? The constant feeling that something is about to go wrong? It does not stop entirely, Aislinn admitted, but you learn to channel it. That awareness becomes an asset in the right context. The others think I am just jumpy, weak. Then give them time to learn otherwise, just as you should give yourself time. Over the following weeks, Aislinn's unit began to transform. What had been a collection of demoralized soldiers became a cohesive team with growing confidence. Word spread through the base about the unique training methods employed by Captain Limpy, a nickname that had begun as an insult from other officers, but was reclaimed by Aislinn's unit as a badge of honor. Command took notice. 6 weeks into the program, Colonel Reeves requested a demonstration for visiting Pentagon officials interested in rehabilitation protocols. Aislinn's unit would compete against a standard platoon in a modified field exercise. The night before the demonstration, Aislinn found Lowry waiting outside her office. "They are setting you up," he said without preamble. "Reeves never believed in this program. He wants you to fail publicly so he can redirect the funding." Aislinn continued organizing her paperwork. "That is his prerogative." Aislinn, Lowry rarely used her first name. "The opposing platoon is Wolcott's current group. They have been training specifically to counter your techniques." She looked up, her expression unreadable. "Then tomorrow should be educational for everyone." The demonstration course was deliberately challenging. A mile of rough terrain followed by tactical problem-solving stations, and a combat simulation using training rounds. Bleachers had been erected for the observers, creating a circus-like atmosphere that did nothing for the recruits' nerves. "They are watching us like we are some kind of experiment," Calloway muttered as they prepared their gear. "We are," Aislinn replied calmly. "The question is, what will the results show?" Colonel Reeves addressed the observers with barely concealed condescension. "Today we witness an interesting experiment. Captain Taggart believes that soldiers with significant physical limitations can be effective in field operations when given specialized training. Personally, I believe our standards exist for good reasons, but I am willing to be proven wrong." The event began with both units navigating the terrain course. Wolcott's platoon took an early lead, moving with the coordinated efficiency of well-trained soldiers. However, as the course progressed, Aislinn's adaptations began to show their value. Her unit maintained a steady pace that did not flag, each member compensating for others' limitations in a system they had practiced extensively. By the problem-solving stations, the gap had narrowed considerably. Winter, whose hypervigilance Aislinn had channeled into exceptional observational skills, identified solution patterns faster than anyone in either unit. Calloway's upper body strength made quick work of obstacles that slowed others. The combat simulation would decide the outcome. Both units took defensive positions in a mock village, with the objective of protecting key structures while neutralizing opposing forces. Standard doctrine favored aggressive maneuvers and overwhelming force, approaches that Wolcott's unit executed textbook perfectly. Aislinn had trained her people differently. Unable to match conventional units in speed or power, they excelled in positioning, communication, and tactical patience. They set layered defenses that funneled attackers into carefully prepared zones. They conserved energy where Wolcott's unit expended it freely. 40 minutes into the hour-long simulation, the advantage began to shift. Wolcott's aggressive tactics had cost them half their effective force, while Aislinn's unit remained largely intact. The observers leaned forward as the momentum visibly shifted. When time expired, the outcome was clear. Aislinn's unit had maintained control of 4 of 5 objective points, while eliminating 60% of the opposing force. They had suffered only 30% casualties in comparison. As the units reassembled for evaluation, Colonel Reeves looked distinctly uncomfortable. The data contradicted his narrative too clearly for dismissal. One of the Pentagon observers, a general with combat ribbons covering his chest, approached Aislinn. "Impressive adaptation of standard doctrine, Captain. Your people demonstrated excellent tactical flexibility." "Thank you, sir." They simply applied their personal experiences to the battlefield reality. "And you? What did you apply from your experience?" Aislinn met his gaze directly. "That limitations force innovation, sir, and innovation wins battles that strength alone cannot." The following week brought orders that surprised even Lowry. Aislin's program was not only being continued, but expanded into a formal training center for combat-wounded veterans returning to duty. She would oversee the development of a comprehensive adaptive tactics manual for implementation across all branches. When the news reached her former basic training platoon, now scattered to various assignments, Rhodes sent a simple message: "They should have never underestimated you. We will not make that mistake again." Daniels went further, requesting assignment as an instructor in the new program. "I want to learn what I should have seen," he wrote. 6 months after crushing the Valor Ridge Run, Captain Oislin Taggart stood before a new class of instructors, preparing them to teach her methods across the service. Her limp remained, a permanent reminder of sacrifice. But now, when people stared, it was not with dismissal, but with recognition. Adaptive strength, she told the assembled officers, is not about overcoming limitation. It is about transforming limitation into tactical advantage. The soldier who has never failed, never adapted, and never overcome is the most vulnerable on the battlefield. She gestured to the training field where her original unit was demonstrating techniques for a new group of wounded warriors. "We do not serve despite our scars," she said. "We serve with greater effectiveness because of them." The Adaptive Combat Training Center had not existed 18 months earlier. Now it occupied a significant portion of Fort Jackson's training grounds, with purpose-built facilities designed to prepare wounded veterans for continued service. At its heart stood the administration building, where Captain Aislinn Taggart reviewed the latest batch of applications. "We have 30 new candidates arriving next week," Major Daniels said, placing another folder on her desk. His promotion had come shortly after transferring to the program, recognition of his effectiveness in translating Aislinn's methods into standardized protocols. "How many from conventional combat arms?" she asked, scanning the list. 23. The others are support personnel looking to return to forward positions." Aislinn nodded. The program had expanded beyond its original scope, attracting interest from across military specialties. What began as a rehabilitation experiment had evolved into something much more significant: a fundamental rethinking of combat effectiveness and human potential. "There is something else," Daniels added, his tone shifting. "The Secretary of Defense is visiting next month. Apparently, the success metrics have caught attention at the highest levels." "That means more scrutiny," Aislinn replied, unsurprised. "Success always bred both supporters and skeptics." "And more resources if we impress them," Daniels countered. "Your father would be proud of what you have built here." The mention of her father still triggered a complex wave of emotions. James Taggart had been a legend in special operations, known for unconventional approaches and fierce loyalty to his people. His final act in Kandahar, evacuating wounded personnel while mortally wounded himself, had earned him the Medal of Honor posthumously. What few knew was that Aislinn had been there as well, serving as a liaison officer during what should have been a routine diplomatic mission. When the compound was attacked, she had helped coordinate the evacuation until the IED blast that killed her father and left her with injuries doctors initially deemed career-ending. "My father would have expected nothing less," she said finally, returning to the applications. Later that afternoon, Aislinn observed training from the elevated walkway that allowed instructors to monitor multiple sessions simultaneously. Below, Sergeant Winter was leading stress inoculation training for soldiers with combat trauma. Her once debilitating hypervigilance had been channeled into making her one of their most effective PTSD specialists. Nearby, Lieutenant Calloway supervised advanced mobility drills for amputees. His prosthetic leg was now adorned with the program insignia, a phoenix rising with the motto, "Forge through fire," beneath it. Quite a view, is it not? The voice belonged to Colonel Lowry, recently promoted and assigned as medical director for the entire program. "Sometimes I still cannot believe they let us build all this," Aislinn admitted. "They did not let us build anything," Lowry corrected. "You proved it was necessary, and they had no choice but to recognize the results." Different approach entirely. Results were indeed difficult to dispute. Graduation rates had climbed steadily as their methods refined. More importantly, field performance data showed that program graduates often outperformed their non-injured counterparts in specific combat scenarios, particularly those requiring adaptive thinking under pressure. "The Pentagon delegation arrives in 3 weeks," Lowry continued. Word is they are considering implementing elements of the program in standard combat training, not just for wounded personnel. That would be a significant shift in doctrine. Indeed, which is why not everyone is enthusiastic. General Harmon has been particularly vocal in opposition. Aislinn knew Harmon by reputation. Old school, inflexible, deeply invested in traditional force metrics like speed and power. He represented the mindset that had initially dismissed her as broken, writ large at the policy level. Then we will need to be particularly convincing, she said. The following day brought an unexpected visitor. Drill Sergeant Wolcott, now nearing retirement, appeared in her office doorway. His face had acquired new lines, but his posture remained impeccable. Captain Taggart, he said formally. May I have a word? Aislinn gestured to the chair across from her desk. Of course. This is a surprise, Sergeant Wolcott. Wolcott sat with the stiffness of a man unaccustomed to conversations not conducted at parade rest. I am being assigned to your program for my final tour. Seemed appropriate to introduce myself properly this time. The irony was not lost on either of them. Their first introduction had featured his dismissal of her as a broken part in the military machine. We can certainly use your experience, Aislinn said diplomatically. That is not why I am here, Wolcott replied, his discomfort evident. I owe you an acknowledgement. I was wrong about you, catastrophically wrong, and not just about you specifically, but about what makes an effective soldier. Aislinn had imagined this conversation many times, but now found herself unsure how to respond. Wolcott had been the embodiment of the system that nearly rejected her. The military evolves, Sergeant. All of us learn. Some more slowly than others, he admitted. I have spent 30 years believing there was only one path to creating soldiers. You proved otherwise. And now I find myself nearing retirement, wondering how many others I misjudged, how many potentially exceptional soldiers I discarded because they did not fit my narrow definition. Then perhaps your final tour can help answer that question, Aislinn suggested. We need instructors who understand both the traditional approach and its limitations. Wolcott nodded slowly. I would consider it a privilege to serve under your command, Captain. As he stood to leave, he added, the day you outpaced the entire platoon on Valor Ridge, I realized I had fundamentally misunderstood something essential about strength. I am still learning what that means. The Pentagon visit was scheduled with military precision. 3 generals, the Secretary of Defense, and various staffers would observe morning training sessions, receive a briefing on program metrics, and witness an afternoon demonstration of adaptive combat techniques. The evening before their arrival, Aislinn walked the grounds alone, a habit she had developed whenever significant decisions loomed. Her leg ached more than usual, barometric pressure dropping ahead of an approaching storm. Weather had become a useful barometer for her own body, one of many adaptations she had internalized. Captain, a voice called from behind her. It was Specialist Zhang, one of their newest trainees, still adjusting to life with a traumatic brain injury that affected his balance and spatial processing. Specialist, she acknowledged, you should be resting. Big day tomorrow. That is why I wanted to speak with you, he said, falling into step beside her, his movements carefully controlled. I heard General Harmon will be evaluating us. He was my former commander. He opposed my inclusion in this program. Aislinn had not known this detail. Are you concerned about his presence? Not for myself, Zhang clarified. But I know how he thinks. He will be looking for any evidence that this program is producing substandard soldiers, that we are a liability rather than an asset. The insight was valuable. Then we will simply have to demonstrate otherwise. There is something else, Zhang hesitated. When I was injured, General Harmon visited me in the hospital. He told me I had served honorably and should accept medical discharge with dignity rather than fight to stay in a role I could no longer perform effectively. He believed he was being kind. Aislinn understood immediately. This was not just policy disagreement. For Harmon, the program represented a fundamental challenge to his worldview about duty, capability, and the nature of military service itself. Thank you for telling me, she said. Get some rest, Specialist. Tomorrow we change some minds. The delegation arrived precisely at 800, a procession of polished vehicles and crisp uniforms. Secretary Dawson led the group, flanked by Generals Harmon, Peterson, and Whitley. Staff officers and aides followed with tablets and portfolios, ready to document every aspect of the visit. Colonel Lowry handled initial introductions, while Aislinn remained slightly apart, observing the dynamics. General Harmon, as expected, projected skepticism in every gesture, from his cursory handshake to the way his eyes swept critically over the training facilities. The morning sessions proceeded flawlessly. Each instructor demonstrated specific training protocols, developed for different types of injuries and limitations. Graduates of the program served as exemplars, showing progression from initial rehabilitation to full combat effectiveness. During the briefing, Aislinn presented performance data comparing program graduates to standard forces. The metrics were compelling. While program soldiers scored lower in raw speed and strength tests, they consistently outperformed in adaptability, tactical problem-solving, and operational endurance. Essentially, she concluded, we are not creating soldiers who succeed despite their injuries. We are developing operators who succeed because their injuries force them to develop exceptional compensatory abilities. Secretary Dawson nodded thoughtfully. General Peterson looked intrigued. General Whitley took extensive notes. General Harmon remained stone-faced. Impressive statistics, Captain, Harmon said when she finished. But combat is not fought with spreadsheets. I would be interested in seeing how your trainees perform under genuine pressure. That is precisely what this afternoon's demonstration will show, General, Aislinn replied. We have prepared a comparative exercise pitting our adaptive unit against a conventional squad using standard doctrine. Lunch brought a moment of unexpected connection. As the delegation moved through the dining facility, Secretary Dawson maneuvered to walk alongside Aislinn. Your father and I served together during Desert Storm, he said quietly. He had a unique perspective even then, always looking for the advantage others missed. Aislinn had not known of this connection. He rarely spoke of his early deployments. James was more interested in listening than talking, Dawson smiled. He would have recognized what you were building here, not just a training program, but a different way of thinking about human potential. The afternoon demonstration was designed to showcase what made the program unique. Rather than a standard force-on-force exercise, they had created a complex problem-solving scenario. Both units faced the same tactical challenge: secure an objective while dealing with unexpected obstacles, limited resources, and changing parameters. From the observation platform, the delegation watched as the exercise unfolded. The conventional unit approached the problem with textbook precision, moving quickly and applying overwhelming force to early challenges. The adaptive unit began more deliberately, analyzing patterns and conserving resources. 20 minutes in, the scenario shifted dramatically. Key routes were suddenly blocked, communications became limited, and medical emergencies were introduced. The conventional unit struggled to adjust, their initial advantages becoming liabilities as they had committed too many resources too early. The adaptive unit, composed entirely of program graduates with various physical limitations, displayed remarkable flexibility. They had anticipated disruption as inevitable rather than exceptional. Where the conventional unit tried to power through obstacles, the adaptive unit found ways to bypass them altogether. Notice the communication patterns, Aislinn pointed out to the observers. Conventional doctrine emphasizes hierarchical decision-making. Our units develop distributed authority. Every soldier is trained to adapt independently while maintaining cohesion. By the exercise conclusion, the difference was stark. The conventional unit had partially achieved their objective, but at significant simulated casualty cost. The adaptive unit had fully secured their objective with minimal losses. General Harmon watched with narrowed eyes. When the teams assembled for debriefing, he asked to address them directly. Impressive demonstration, he acknowledged, but I must ask, how would these adaptations hold up under sustained combat conditions? Ingenuity has limits when faced with the brutal realities of extended deployment. The question hung in the air. Before Aislinn could respond, Specialist Zhang stepped forward. Permission to speak, sir. Harmon recognized him immediately. Granted, Specialist. General, when you visited me at Walter Reed, you told me my combat days were over, that I should accept reality and find a new path to serve. Zhang's voice was steady. With respect, sir, you were half right. I did need to find a new path, but not away from combat readiness. Instead, I needed to discover how my injury could become an advantage. He gestured to his teammates. Every person here has done the same. We do not succeed by pretending we are uninjured. We succeed by transforming how we approach problems precisely because of our limitations. Secretary Dawson nodded slowly. The most dangerous opponent is often the one who has had to overcome the greatest obstacles to reach the battlefield. They have already proven their resilience before the first shot is fired. In the months following the Pentagon visit, changes came rapidly. Funding increased for program expansion to 3 additional bases. Elements of adaptive training were incorporated into standard combat preparation for all forces. Captain Taggart received orders for promotion to major, along with a new assignment: Pentagon Liaison for Special Warfare Adaptation Programs. The evening before her departure for Washington, Aislinn made one final walk through the training grounds. The facility that had begun as her personal mission had evolved into something that would outlast her direct involvement. New instructors, many of them program graduates, would carry the work forward. At the memorial wall, recently installed to honor those who had contributed to the program's development, she stopped before the central plaque. It bore her father's name, alongside others who had demonstrated that limitation was often the catalyst for extraordinary innovation. Colonel Lowry found her there as twilight settled over the base. "The transport is ready whenever you are," he said. "I was just saying goodbye," she replied. "It is strange to leave something that began so personally." "You are not leaving it behind," Lowry observed. "You are ensuring it continues forward. Different mission, same purpose." Aislinn nodded, her hand resting briefly on her father's name. "He used to tell me that the most important battles are not won with superior force, but with superior adaptation. I did not fully understand what he meant until I had to rebuild myself after Kandahar. And now, others will learn the same lesson without having to discover it alone," Lowry said. "That is a legacy worth building." As they walked toward the waiting vehicle, they passed the training field where a new class was completing evening exercises. Among them was a young lieutenant with a prosthetic arm, calling cadence with unwavering confidence. "They called me broken on day 1, Aislinn reflected. "Now that same word has been redefined for an entire generation of warriors." Lowry smiled. "Not broken, just adapting to a different kind of strength." The next morning, as her transport lifted off, Aislinn watched the Adaptive Combat Training Center recede below. What had begun with a solitary figure limping across a finish line had transformed into a movement that would reshape military doctrine for decades to come. The legacy would continue, carried forward by every soldier who learned that limitations were not obstacles to overcome, but foundations upon which to build unexpected strength.